thank you all for coming. I'm so glad to see such a great turnout at our annual round robin finals. So for those of you who haven't been here before, the round robin finals brings together many of the best debaters and debate judges from around the world. You'll look around, these flags are not only decorative, they actually also represent all the nations that have attended the round robin in these past 10 years. And this is our 10th annual round robin, which when I say it, I can't really believe that it's been 10 years since this started. So let me tell you a couple quick things for those who are new to the event. First of all, we have 4 teams competing. 2 of them are on what we would call the government side over here, and they are representing, they're arguing in favor of the topic, and I'll tell you the topic in a minute. And these are the 2 teams arguing against that. The competition happens among all the teams if your 2 teams are on the same side of the bench, as it's called, then they are competing against each other, not by disagreeing with each other, but by trying to come up with the better arguments, the better reasoning, the better persuasive speeches in favor of their side. So it's a very interesting competition. It actually encourages great depth of analysis, because after the first more obvious arguments are given, then the next team has to dig deeper and get more involved in the question being debated. So the other thing I want to make a quick remark about for people who are new is you will see some people, as somebody is speaking, somebody on the other bench will stand up, and that indicates they would like to ask them a question. It is up to the speaker whether they will take any questions and how many they'll recognize. They can just wave the question down or say no thank you, or they can accept the question, in which case this questioner has 15 seconds to ask a question or make a point. The obvious reason to take them is that you seem to be more engaged, more confident about what you're saying if you're engaging with the opposition. So, what else do I need to say? So I think the only thing left to tell you is about the topic, which, by the way, again, if you're not familiar, these teams learned about this topic 15 minutes ago and have had just that amount of time to prepare, and they are not allowed to have any access to the internet. It's just they have to think about what they already know and use that to formulate the arguments that they will come up with. So the topic for today is, if I can remember the exact wording, is our attempt to have a sensible debate about death panels without Sarah Palin involved. And so what we're going to be arguing about is the motion is this House supports this House supports health insurance companies offering their patients a lump sum payment if those patients will choose voluntarily to forego expensive life-extending treatments. So, with that being said, I welcome the first speaker from the, I didn't introduce the teams, quickly. For teams here, first team on the opening government is from Cambridge. The closing team for government is from Tel Aviv University. On opening opposition, the local boys from Yale. And in closing opposition, the other team from Cambridge. I recognize the Prime Minister and invite her to open the debate, defending the motion which stands in her name.
Okay, just testing, is this fine? Health insurance is meant to preserve your attainment of the good life. The problem is that one's conception of the good life is radically altered and often completely different when you're lying on your deathbed in the final moments of your life. We think that in the current status quo, health insurance companies do not adequately protect and provide die for terminally ill patients. We think it's a fundamentally dignifying choice to ensure that if you're a cancer patient about to die within the next month, you probably can get 50,000 to ensure your child goes to college, rather than having to only get that money by means of having expensive, often invasive and protracted and painful life extending procedures. Broadly speaking, what do we stand for as a model? First, that patient has to be of sound mind. We think that the status quo ensures this is the case. For instance, when we allow terminally ill patients to consent into euthanasia, similar standards apply. What we would not allow, however, is for families to decide this on behalf of patients. Second, this would be any kind of legally binding contract like any other. Last of all, the amount agreed upon will be something that both parties consent to. It will probably be less than the amount paid by the health insurance company for expensive life-extending treatments. Three arguments therefore. First, why it's a dignifying choice for the terminally ill? Second, how this ensures that more terminally ill patients make the option, hold on a minute, to take life insurance, health insurance, and why this is good for them. And last, how we maximize resources to ensure more equitable provision of health insurance. Before I move on,
Will health insurance companies be mandated to provide this option in all circumstances?
Yeah, so they will, and if you're a terminally ill patient, you have this option offered to you. First argument, therefore, why it's a dignifying choice for the terminally ill? As I already alluded to, health insurance is meant to be a safety net. So usually it's meant to insulate you against unexpected health risk or illnesses, for instance, to ensure that you can eventually cope with the monetary cost of the health risk. The problem is that ordinarily, treatment ensures you're able to access the good life. So for instance, if I have a back injury, usually treating that by means of health insurance ensures that I'm able to continue functioning in society. The problem is that this is not categorically true for terminally ill patients, and often that life-extending treatment does not do them as much good. Why is this the case? First, because life-extending procedures tend to be quite invasive and painful. Many terminally ill patients don't wish to take up such treatments in the first place. But second, many terminally ill patients regard life-extending treatments as having minimal impact and benefit to themselves. At best, perhaps you extend their lives for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But that's not what most terminally ill patients want. If I'm a cancer patient, we think a vast majority of cancer patients will want chemotherapy that extends their lives by 2 months at best. That cancer patient might very well instead choose to take up an offer that allows her 80,000, for instance, to put a kid into college, to ensure that the kid doesn't starve or doesn't suffer any financial shocks when she eventually passes away. It's fundamentally immoral to force that patient to endure an invasive procedure as an only means by which we provide for them by means of health insurance. In case opposition brings us any line about coercion, we have two preemptive responses to that. We think, first of all, the presence of money doesn't distort your choice fundamentally as someone to make and consent to the decision. If we entitle the terminally ill patient to decide to undergo radically life-altering, life-extending procedures in the first place, just because the nature of the reward in turn now is the one that's monetary, doesn't affect his or her ability to consent into that. But second, it's a perfectly legitimate decision for terminally ill patients to consent into. If they decide that the appeal of having a lump sum at once, which is monetarily beneficial for them in ensuring their kids go to college or ensuring that their kids eventually have some sort of safety net, we think it's one that they're entitled to make. Second argument, therefore, how in the status quo, people with pre-existing conditions don't sign up for health insurance, and that's problematic. Let's make it clear. The status quo is that if you're a terminally ill patient and you know you're eventually going to die, if you have a pre-existing condition, no thank you, you most likely won't take up the option of signing up for health insurance. Why? Because you know full well that the premiums you pay on a monthly basis are probably going to bleed you dry, and in fact bleed your children dry as well. Consequently, many people with pre-existing conditions that render them terminally ill don't take up health insurance. Opposition might ask, why is this a bad thing? For two reasons. The first is that there are often spillover benefits. For instance, your family, hold on a minute, might be covered by the same benefits. So even if you're eventually going to pass away, there are often some consequential benefits to that. But second is that even if you don't receive life-extending procedures and treatments, often there are incidental benefits for it. For instance, it might be preferable for you to die on a hospital bed rather than on the street. Having some sort of minimal health insurance ensures and guarantees that. Yeah.
How much of this point is relevant post-Obamacare, when in a vast majority of countries around the world, you cannot take pre-existing conditions into account?
That's just about America, right? Presumably this debate takes place in a variety of countries where such conditions are not taken care of. So what the problem is therefore that overwhelmingly, the incentive is for a patient of a terminally ill patient with pre-existing conditions has an incentive to not take up health insurance, because now the monetary cost of it far outweighs any kind of conceivable payoff that he or she might receive. Now we ensure that people sign up for health insurance and reap these rewards in the first place. Because at least people know that even if they don't accept life-extending treatments, they at the very least can receive some kind of lump sum payment which might be very beneficial to them and their families in the long run. That's how we cater adequately for the group of terminally ill patients for whom the status quo model is simply inadequate. Last argument, therefore, how we maximize resources to ensure greater equitable provision, of health insurance. Currently in the status quo, there are several groups of vulnerable who are not adequately taken care of. For instance, people like the elderly, or even people suffering from conditions like HIV or AIDS. The problem is that health companies often have to pay up to $800,000, for instance, per cancer patient when a cancer patient undergoes chemotherapy for months and months on end, on top of catering for already vulnerable groups. What does that mean is that the risk to the insurance company is extremely high. This causes insurance companies to adopt one of two things. One, this means that they raise prices of premiums massively. Second, sometimes these groups are just not insured at all and are just left vulnerable and not catered for. How do we change this? In two ways. The first is that we free up resources for health insurance companies. Now, health insurance companies have a lot more resources given that presumably they spend less on each terminally ill patient. That means that the money they now have is either invested into more research for other kinds of illnesses, or they lower the prices of their premiums, both of which are obviously beneficial to the vulnerable in society who are now more able to access these health insurance. But second is that the risk involved to the health insurance company is much reduced. What this also means is that the prices of premiums go down, and therefore the vulnerable have far more access to basic protections of health insurance. We don't think this diminishes the provision of palliative care in any way, because these are taken care of by pharmaceuticals, not health insurance companies. Nonetheless, pharmaceuticals still retain an incentive to invest in palliative care because vulnerable people who eventually die at some point are going to require it. For all these reasons, it's a fundamentally dignifying choice for the terminally ill with a radically different conception of the good life to be entitled to make. More than that, it makes health insurance far more accessible to everyone. Extremely proud to propose.
I thank that speaker very much for her remarks, and this House is now pleased to recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
This bargain is offered in every case, but it is not taken in every case. We think the cases in which this sort of trade is likely to occur are twofold. The first is, on the one hand, when individuals must choose between more money and more life, and they must make that choice. That is to say, they might value that money more because they're actually forced to make that choice. We think those individuals are most likely to be members of the poor or middle class. On the other side of this bargain, we say it's only when insurance companies save money, but they save money in two ways, one of which opening government neglected. The first is obviously the treatment is expensive, but second of all, it is also the case that those individuals that were now on their insurance plan are no longer being cared for as long of a time. So when, for example, insurance companies see on their spreadsheets that the life expectancy of that individual goes down, that is a decrease in cost for them. We wouldn't put it past those companies to think like that when you think of people as numbers and not necessarily as people in waiting rooms. At that ugly intersection then, we think that's where this trade happens, and it's important for the following two reasons. First of all, we're going to explain to you why we think this is an illegitimate choice, that is to say, it is a violation of the care principle for these particular entities. Second of all, we'll explain why it's the case that actually their policy reduces choice, particularly for vulnerable individuals in the long run, that is to say, leads to premature death, thus not justifying the sorts of individual choices that these individuals make. First, though, rebuttal to opening government's case. The first thing that I want to put aside is there's this strain of argument that they say that treatment does very little good for these individuals. It's invasive, it's painful, it's not worth that much to them. And that's to say that there are two types of individuals. One, it is certainly true that it is, and regrettable, that for some individuals, it is the case that that sort of life-sustaining treatment is not as valuable, it is incredibly painful, and those individuals might already decide to, for example, end their life. But it is also the case that the class of individuals government is specifically talking about are individuals who would have otherwise, I'll get you in a second, preferred to have stayed alive and only make this choice once they say that money is more valuable than that life. We think that is the choice that in particular is important, the reasons we'll explain, but that's an important clarification. Secondly, I'll get to, closing first.
Just to be clear, does Sayed's position in this debate support euthanasia?
Sorry, what?
Does Sayed's position in this debate support euthanasia?
Do we support euthanasia? Like, it is a thing that exists in society and individuals can make use of that. It's a question of whether or not this policy promotes good outcomes for those patients, which is which it doesn't, so we're going to say that. Cool, awesome. Now the second point of rebuttal. Opening government also said that it's the case that it's not equitable how health insurance is distributed in the status quo. That's to say, some individuals who are poor have trouble accessing that health insurance because, for example, they have pre-existing conditions. Two things. Closing opposition are right to point out that the government is often able to cover those sorts of things. So that's to say, you can, for example, use legislation to make sure that health insurance applies to those individuals. We would say, though, that seems like it is weird to buy lives off of poor and middle-class individuals as a means of paying for the health insurance for other individuals, which is exactly the specific trade-off that is happening here. But second of all they explain is that there is a higher profit margin for insurance companies. That is to say, for the reasons that we just explained, they make more money. But there is no explanation of why that money would actually be reinvested in the sorts of causes they believe in. That is to say, profit margins are likely to just go into the pockets of people who tend to own insurance companies, and that is a link that opening government never justified. Now, the substantive problem. First of all, why is it the case that we think this is an illegitimate choice, a violation in particular of the care principle? The reason that we have institutions like hospitals, healthcare providers, health insurance providers in society is because they are the individuals that can provide a unique good to the public, and that unique good is care. We think that it is the case that it is incumbent upon those individuals, that is to say, they have an obligation to avoid causing harm and avoid knowingly causing harm to those individuals. That means it is a violation of that principle, and it is wrong then to incentivize those individuals to give less care to other individuals who they are responsible to in society. Why? Because if those are the only individuals in society who can provide that care, then it's the case that there's a contradiction in the role that we envision that institution playing in society. That's why the sort of undue coercion that government places on these individuals is unjustified, because it interferes with the ability of these individuals, of healthcare providers, to provide care to the fullest extent possible. Certainly, government might say it is not coercion to the extent that each individual person might make a decision that is rational to them, but it is coercive to the extent that it is an incentive that cuts across care, and if you believe that is the teleological purpose of that institution, that's a violation of that principle. Open and give a POI.
You talk to us about the poor. Why is it okay for poor terminally ill patients to receive life-extending treatment and then work in dismal conditions, presumably below minimum wage? Like either treatment for that same patient to afford and accept the lump sum payment we're proposing.
Excellent. So this argument is just, well, sometimes you do pay individuals to do bad things. But we do think, one, there's a qualitative difference here, which I'm about to explain, and that is to say that it is the case in this particular case, you are literally paying individuals to give up their lives. That's to say, this is akin to, for example, government paying welfare recipients or soldiers to go on suicide missions or do things of that sort. We think that sort of trade is unconscionable. That's to say, certainly an individual might make that choice, but it does not actually mean that it would be better for that individual because that value, for example, the value of life to that individual is so much higher. Why? Because it's not actually one of those things that you can quantify, but we do actually believe that that is life. It is the possibility for them to do anything that they want to decide. It's the possibility, for example, for them to stay alive and give benefits to their family members. It's the possibility for them to do things that might find fulfilling given other things that improve in society. So we think it's unconscionable for that reason. But second of all, no, the other problem with that POI is to say, even if it's good for those individuals, it is not necessarily good for all individuals in society, and that's the second point of substantive. So first of all, no, we want to clarify what this actually looks like. We think in order for government's policy to work, it is the case that many, many, many people will take this bargain, and we're going to actually justify why that's the case. Why? Because we actually think it is unfortunate, given the circumstances in the status quo, that healthcare costs are incredibly high. They've outpaced inflation, they are increasing at an enormous rate, and it is the case, and that means that many individuals would be incentivized to take that money, among many of the other reasons open government names in their own speech. What this means then is that the aggregate social effect of this is that many poor and middle class individuals will be taking this bargain, and we think that ultimately this reduces choice in the long run. Why? Two reasons. First of all, it is the case that now you have a very, very small subset of individuals who actually need life-saving treatment to a long extent. That's to say, only rich individuals who are not forced to make this choice, the sorts of individuals that avoid the bargain that we explained in the introduction to this speech, are the ones who invest in life-saving treatment when the rest of society is the one that are taking this bargain. What this means then, and this cut directly against government's case, is that it is very likely there'll be zero incentive for individuals to actually invest or develop in life-saving treatment, particularly in the societies where you don't have government protections for people with pre-existing conditions or other deficiencies in terms of insurance. But second of all, we also think it's also perverse on the side of insurance providers that they will make treatments worse. That's to say, they have a perverse incentive to make treatments for those individuals worse because they save money by more for individuals taking this bargain. So what this looks like is, for example, covering fewer options when individuals need life-saving care as part of the terms of that insurance. It looks like, for example, paying for less high-quality care when it comes to the terms of that insurance, or just refusing to put those in the plans in the first place. What this means is that in the long term, you do not get the sort of development of a healthcare system that actually provides meaningful choice for any individual that in the future finds themselves similarly situated, such that they must make a choice between ending their life for some other reasons or extending that life in order to preserve the value that it might bring to them. For these reasons, we're incredibly proud to oppose.
I thank that speaker for his remarks, and this House is now pleased to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
Panel, never have I been so proud to be a citizen of a socialist welfare republic. Vote Corbyn, vote Sanders. I'm going to talk about three things in this debate. Firstly, broadly, the principle. Secondly, what happens to the health industry more broadly. Thirdly, what happens to coverage of individuals. Two brief points of rebuttal that don't fit into that. Firstly, on the idea that this creates a perverse incentive for health companies to systematically deny care to their patients in order to basically shove them into taking this deal. I think for a side that was so keen to claim the benefits of the rule of law and legislation in terms of preventing the denial of coverage to individuals, I think it's then disingenuous for them to say, oh, but we can't possibly prevent healthcare patient companies effectively setting out to systematically murder their patients. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to claim that police and law enforcement officials more generally might take issue with the idea that health companies were letting patients die deliberately. Secondly, second point of rebuttal, they say research will potentially be harmed into methods of life-extending care, resting on the incredibly false assumption that health companies are the people who conduct research in the first place. No, it's the pharmaceutical companies who conduct research into healthcare and into these kinds of life-saving treatments. I'm going to suggest that the first pharmaceutical company to create a drug which successfully and painlessly prolongs the life of a cancer patient is going to make millions irrespective of whether or not we introduce this policy. I think it's deeply disingenuous to suggest that pharmaceutical companies will stop trying to make money. Let's turn then to the principle of this debate. And the first challenge we received here was, can individuals really choose? Yes, for two reasons. The first is the numerous intuitive examples that Et told you about, whereby it is a legitimate trade-off for a person to sacrifice a few months of painful living in return to a near infinite number of months that their family could enjoy the money that they gained by so doing. Secondly, we tell you that the state allows individuals to consciously shorten their lives all the time. We allow individuals to drink, we allow individuals to smoke, we allow individuals to drive cars, even though all of those acts will almost certainly at some point lead to the deaths of various people within this room. The reason we do that is because if we didn't do that, it would lead to an absurd situation whereby this state just locked everyone in closed rooms, fed them on lettuce all day, and didn't allow them to lead the good life. But the third reason why it's probably good that we enshrine the principle of choice in this way is because necessarily there will be a divergence of opinions here. Some patients will want to opt for this policy, some patients will want to opt for that policy. We see no reason on opening government to fetishize the preferences of one set of those people to create a blanket policy which coerces everyone. The next thing they give us on principle is this idea of duty, a teleological duty, quote unquote, to provide care. I think they rest this point on an incredibly narrow conception of what care actually is. That is to say, they assume that the only way people can care for individuals is by putting them on a bed and putting them on a chemotherapy drip. I think care is basically a synonym for caring for people. Essentially, care is probably a synonym for doing things which are good for the person in question. That is to say, if I do nice things for your kids, I am presumably, at least in some senses, taking care of you. I don't think we're violating any form of teleological duty, whatever that means, on their side of the house. Next, they give us this bizarre idea that individuals will have an overwhelming obligation to preserve life. If that is the case, if it is the case that individual health companies have an overwhelming duty to preserve and prolong life, then why do we allow people routinely to refuse this kind of treatment? Why do we allow people to consciously turn down the chemotherapy medicine, even though that will certainly lead to their own speedier death? I ask opening opposition, would they be willing to compel those people to take that chemotherapy medicine? I don't think they would. On opening government, we're going to suggest two alternative duties that healthcare systems have. We think the first is to obviously and trivially respect the choice of the patients in question. That is to say, respect the people whose lives they hold in their hands and respect their agency and their desires and their conception of the good life. I think our model caters for that conception of duty much better than theirs does. But secondly, we just think healthcare units and governments more generally should probably just be in the business of maximizing utility, for the simple reason that pleasure and pain are the only capacities for moral intuitions that we all share, and therefore presumably the most rational bases for a system of morality. I'm going to turn now to talk about the healthcare industry more general. And the subtitle of this point will be why we have zero problem with companies getting filthy rich, irrespective of what opening opposition say. Premise one of this point: life-extending treatments are some of the highest cost borne by healthcare companies for three reasons. Firstly, the illnesses involved are necessarily complex and incurable, thus requiring a disproportionate amount of care. Secondly, they're necessarily long-term because terminal illness tend to last for a long time. Thirdly, at the risk of sounding crude, the companies get no return on their investment after the person recovers because you stop paying insurance premiums once they're dead. So there's no chance under the status quo for them to shrug off this overwhelming cost. We give them that chance. Premise two: many agreements will be reached because people have a variety of motives, as At explained, so it's plausible that a large number of these contracts will be signed. In that case, I think it is fair to say on opening government that we disproportionately increase the profitability of healthcare companies. Why exactly do we have do we think this is a good idea? And I'll get to that after I've taken Ashish.
Are you okay with paying people to commit suicide?
It probably depends, right? I mean, I think people probably have a plausible range of conceptions of when life is and is not worth living. At the point where, yeah, I think that's pretty much it, really. Like, some people may well decide their life is not worth living. At that point, I think it's perfectly fair to do it for whatever reason. So, secondly, on benefits on the benefits of profitability of healthcare companies. Opening opposition say, but what if they just distribute the profits to shareholders? We say that's great because then if shareholder dividends go up, then the price of the share goes up, then more people buy shares in healthcare companies, therefore we get massively greater investment in healthcare companies in the long run. And eventually, obviously, these companies are going to have to invest in some kind of long-term growth strategy, otherwise they'll go under. Realistically, that means two things. Firstly, better facilities for other people who would not otherwise have had them. More hospitals being built. Secondly, an attempt to grow your customer base, which effectively means premiums are lowered. Let's talk finally then about healthcare coverage. And that's gave you a number of reasons why perverse incentives keep these numbers small under the status quo. Their only response to this is to say that it is legally binding to cover everyone. Firstly, I think it's simplistic to assume this debate applies only in the US under Obamacare, which in any way is not safe from repeal. Secondly, we tell you that subtle forms of discrimination can exist. They can find other plausible reasons to deny these people coverage, such as, for example, their job, their income, or their lifestyle choices. And fourthly, insofar as those individuals are denied coverage, they will probably be unable to sue to get that coverage back because of the disproportionate resources of healthcare companies. At the end of this debate, we think individuals have a right to be cared for. Whether or not that care constitutes money, or whether or not that care constitutes chemotherapy, is not up to us, it is up to the individual.
I thank that speaker very much for his remarks, and this House now recognizes the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. The problem with the opening government case is that the fact that some people will choose this option doesn't make it a legitimate policy in the long run if it denies the future individuals the meaningful choice about whether or not they want life-sustaining treatment or have access to it. That's what we brought to you on opening opposition. I want to answer 3 questions in this speech. The first is just analyzing who's going to take the lump sum payment and how that's going to actually change incentives for health insurance companies. Secondly, I want to talk about what the obligations are of providers or intermediaries in the healthcare market. And finally, I want to analyze why this in aggregate is going to lead to socially harmful effects for healthcare. So first, who's going to take this payment? What we told you is that even if it is less money than the cost of life-extending treatment, what opening government identified for us is that that is a significant sum of money, and a large number of people are going to take this option because it's a significant amount of money for them, even if it's less than the cost of life-extending treatment. So on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We think that they gave us analysis to why it's the case that life-sustaining treatment is expensive. But they also told us that everyone would be required to offer this as a health insurer, which means that there's going to be a significant number of people who take this option, who are of the poor and middle class. So that's going to frame how I'm going to answer the next 2 questions in this debate. The second thing I want to look at is what are the obligations of providers or intermediaries in the healthcare market. So what we told you is that there's a prima facie obligation to do no harm. So it's not merely caring in some whatever abstract way the opening government defines caring as, but the fact that healthcare providers have a special obligation not to actually shorten people's lives or do things that harm them in that way. So they told us, would we force people force people to take life-sustaining treatment? We think there's a clear distinction between allowing individuals the choice to refuse life-sustaining treatment and a policy that encourages people not to take it, right? We think the latter is far more coercive insofar as it encourages people to take a particular choice and changes society in a way that you invest less in life-sustaining treatment in the long run. Secondly, we think that there's a difference between the risk of death and accepting certain death at a closer point in time. So it is legitimate, for example, for a person to be offered the choice to join the army where they might risk death, but we think it's probably illegitimate for the governments to pay soldiers a certain amount of money if they agree to go on a suicide mission. We think that is an affront to that person's autonomy at the point where even if that individual might choose to do that, we think that that's an unacceptable balancing of rights at the point where you're saying that that person should wage for their life. You're encouraging them to do so, not just wage for their life, but give it up. We think that's really harmful on their side of the house. We think that that's a significantly larger violation of that person's autonomy than the case where you potentially risk your life. So that's problematic for their side of the house. So the second question I want to ask, the final question I want to ask is just how this changes the health insurance market. And there's a lot of contestation on this point. So what we told you on opening opposition was that in aggregate, what's going to happen is that you undermine the future choice of people who are terminally ill because there'll be less incentive to provide quality life extending treatment, and this particularly splits along socioeconomic lines. But first, I'll take closing.
Under the status quo, when a new medicine is tested, there is a given percent to be in a test or a control group. Therefore, they're going to die for the company to later on make money. Is it a legitimate choice?
So when you accept when you volunteer for a medical trial, you don't think that the side effect is going to be 100% that you're going to die. I think there's a difference between the risk of side effects or the risk of harm and certain death, which is what we told you, what I just told you in the last point. So what happens on their side of the house? Essentially, a collective action problem happens because on an individual basis, people might think that that amount of money is more valuable than the number of years that they would get in the extension of in their extension of life. But in aggregate, what will happen is that more and more individuals will choose to take this option, particularly if it's the large swath of the population that is in the poor and middle class take this option. It means that there's less of an incentive for the health insurers and health care providers, e.g., pharmaceutical
pharmaceutical companies to provide quality life-sustaining care. So we told you that health insurance companies would choose to provide poor quality life-sustaining treatment for their cheaper healthcare plans, the ones that the vast majority of people would take in order to cut costs. So they say that like, well, the government's just going to regulate this away. The problem is that we're not saying that health insurers would just like not cover anything, or doctors would just allow patients to die on the hospital bed. But we think that health insurers are likely to change the benefits in subtle ways. For example, not offering the latest line of chemotherapy treatments, giving people things that have a slightly lower efficacy rate to encourage them to take the choice to actually just accept the lump sum payment. So we think that on aggregate, what happens is you get less coverage by health insurers of quality life-sustaining care. So then they told you that pharmaceutical companies will still have an incentive to develop these kinds of things. Here's the problem, that even if some pharmaceutical companies might develop those things, insurers don't have an incentive to put it in their base plan for the vast majority of people, particularly when there isn't great competition to the healthcare market in the vast majority of the world. So what happens on their side of the house is only the wealthy get access to expensive life-sustaining treatment because they're the ones who can forego that lump sum payment and afford to pay for that expensive coverage or a more expensive plan. So ultimately, that just increases social stratification of healthcare services. We think that's particularly bad. The final line of response that we got out of the opening up the government was that the amount of money to health insurers is fungible, so they'll just reinvest this or lower premiums. We gave you a few responses. The first is that even if this is true, we think it's probably really messed up from the perspective of fairness and social distribution to say that you should buy life years from the poor individuals to invest in life-sustaining treatment or better treatment for the wealthy who get access to like more things because they pay for the more expensive plan. We think that's probably really bad. Secondly, though, we told you that all this means is that you line the pockets of shareholders. So they say that, well, just more people are going to buy out the shares. That's going to be really good in the long run because you encourage investment in that company. We think it's probably not the case that probably not the case that people will not invest in like Aetna or like major insurers on our side of the house. We think that's going to happen either way, regardless of whether the return is 4.1% or 4.3%. But what happens on their side of the house is it just means that the profit margins go up, but nothing actually benefits those people who are at the bottom. Ultimately, they give a choice that harms those who are worse off in society, and it's not a meaningful one. We're proud of it.
I thank that speaker very much, and this House now is pleased to recognize the Member of Government from Tel Aviv.
Dear panel, ladies and gentlemen, under status quo, we acknowledge the fact, and on side opposition, on side government, we acknowledge the fact that people have a right to decide to end their life, specifically terminally ill patients, and we give this in a POI to opening opposition, who agree that euthanasia is something that we're willing to accept in our society. What does this tell us? This tells us that preservation of life is not an absolute societal value. Therefore, the question is, in that choice that people make individually, what sort of incentive structure do they have in making that choice? And specifically, what is the incentive that we're creating here for people, a positive or a negative one? I'm going to be looking at this with two main aspects. One is the issue of free choice, how exactly it occurs. Secondly, I'm going to be looking at the negative externality on the family of the person whose life is being artificially extended. Before that, a few points of extraneous rebuttal to the case we get from opening opposition. Firstly, this whole notion of the obligation not to do no harm is first of all largely undermined by the fact that euthanasia is carried out by medical professionals, meaning they do exactly that in terms of ending people's lives. We're saying their job is obviously to do what is in the best interest of the patient. The patient can reflect his best interest better than they can based on their own decision. Therefore, we're saying they're obligated to that decision, to serving it. Secondly, as Dunn tells us, the fact that today today we do have in medical trials things like control groups of people who we know were largely increasing the risk of death because of promoting the societal goal, means that this is something that the medical profession actually does today, and we don't see a major difference. Secondly, they talk to us about these companies have less of an incentive for life-extending treatments. Firstly, as they note themselves, rich people today will remain main users of these services, which means you still have the great monetary incentive in order to develop them. What they're missing, though, is the fact that specifically for poorer and middle-class people, today they literally have very little access to these sort of treatments. However, when people know, the insurers know that they have less of a risk involved because they can offer them that lump sum, and a lot of them will take that offer. Specifically, people from poorer and middle class are more likely to take that offer, then actually their premiums can now be lower because there's less of a risk to them, meaning more of these people are able to purchase this, more people are able to have that active choice in order to do this. And they're just lying when they tell us there is no competition in the insurance market. Yes, the insurance is going to drop when one company can offer this treatment more cheaply to people, and they still want to sell. Let's talk about free choice, because basically what we get from the oppositions is the fact that we offer a monetary incentive that creates a sort of pressure, and that pressure is illegitimate on the person. Now we're saying obviously free choice is a spectrum. We never choose the best choices that we have. We choose in a suboptimal world in which we have different sorts of things to choose from. Now we're saying that in this specific case, firstly, note that people who are terminally ill often are very lucid. They're actually more, and specifically about this sort of decisions, they're likely to weigh them much more because they have much more the notion of the presence of death close to them. They're much more in a position where they think with themselves, what are my priorities? What are the things I want to leave behind? And we're saying, yes, deciding that I want to live a shorter time in order to leave something for my family, in order to take a vacation and to die and to live the remaining days that I have in the Bahamas or somewhere beautiful where I can feel that I'm dying with dignity. We're saying that is a completely legitimate choice for that person to make. But note moreover, and this is critical, because when does a person really not have a choice? When does he not have a free choice about this? He does not have a free choice in the very extreme situation in which he's suffering from extreme pain that does not allow him to actually concentrate and focus on this. It happens when his family is pressuring him to a large extent, when he's completely dependent on his family and on the medical professionals and on the insurance companies. In those situations, we say, his life is basically an ongoing torture. We as the state actually want to prioritize him, yes, to give him some incentive to end that sort of existence, because we as a state believe that that is a bad lifestyle choice. We don't say he is not entitled to it, but we're saying that we as a state, like we do with any other lifestyle choices we deem as society as harmful, we want to incentivize him to do something that is actually in his best interest at that point in time. Before I go on, I'll take closing.
Your policy asks health insurance companies to combine what is currently health insurance with what is functionally a life insurance policy, which gives people a payout when they die. Why, when being asked to provide two insurance products, do you think they wouldn't just raise their premiums like any other company when asked to provide more products?
Okay, I'll actually really need to get your analysis on this in order to be able to actually respond, so I don't know how I'm supposed to respond to this POI without the analysis, the specific economic analysis. Dunn is likely to address this when you do. Let's talk about the negative externality on the family, because we're saying there is a huge impact here that has not been discussed so far in this debate on the family, the family of the person whose life is currently being expended, because they are also in considerable suffering during very long periods of time, because yes, life extension can be months, it can sometimes be years, and in those years, firstly, it's the psychological suffering of seeing a person you love deteriorating, seeing him just not being himself, losing that image of the person that you loved. Secondly, it's the notion that you're tied to him, that you cannot have your normal life, in the sense that you're constantly, first of all, in fear of when he's going to die, that you have to be there for him, sit by his bed, for a very large period of time, and we're saying this is both psychologically and financially a very limiting factor on your life, and we're saying that economically you have to sustain him for a long period, and it also tends to eat up the life insurance of that person, which means he will have less money to give to his family in the end of the day. So we're saying that because this family is also a very important actor here, again, we want to give more of an incentive in order for a person to prioritize the family, because they are, first of all, more people than the people who are actually terminally ill. And we're saying this is crucial. They also have more. They are actually people who have more of a time to still be in our society. They are people we can protect more, because for that person, both choices are terrible eventually. But for his family, at least we can provide them with some normal and dignified standards of living. So we want again to prioritize this sort of choice. For all these reasons, extremely proud to propose the motion. Thank you very much.
We thank that speaker very much for his remarks and now recognize the member of the opposition.
It is true that preserving life is not an absolute good. It is also true that making it better for people to access these drugs at cheaper cost, that these drugs become more effective for every single person in the future, and there will be millions of these people, is an absolute good. They want to talk about choice now. We want to talk about choice in the future of every single person who will be denied the vast benefits of medical research, which currently is extremely difficult and slow, who will not get drugs that are either cheap or effective, which can only happen in our world. We are happy to instrumentalize people right now if that means create a better society for everyone in the future. Let us deal with some of the rebuttal before I move on to my main extension about how research happens and how the economics of this destroy that possibility of research. They tell us that currently we should let people whose lives are essentially torture kill themselves. This assumes they exist in a context where they can make a genuinely rational, informed choice. This is not true. Why? In the vast majority of countries, a publicly funded hospital is given money based on how many qualities it can get. These are quality-adjusted life years. In other words, how many more years of life do you give your patients, and what's the quality of these things? A terminally ill patient is always encouraged to kill themselves, for the simple reason is that your life expectancy is short anyway, and the quality of that is going to be low. And when a doctor you see as an authoritative source already colludes with insurance companies to say, actually, the harms are really, really vivid, and you might want to consider this so-called dignified option, when the way in which they merely describe the effects of staying alive causes you to be biased in favor of one thing over another, when the mere order in which they present options to you makes you biased towards the first option, doctors already do massively manipulate people into choosing to top themselves because, you know what, they're not very efficient in terms of quality-adjusted life years. But that's a short-term decision they make. It is not an intrinsic feature of being terminally ill that your life is not worth living. We could live in a world where these drugs were cheap and effective, but we never get to that world under their policy. We hear that this is going to cause companies, no thank you, to decrease coverage. And the example here is, oh, in the US, Obamacare might be repealed. I mean, newsflash, the US is kind of weird about this. It's like 30 years behind the ball, guys. So the fact that even the US managing Obamacare, if anything, is testament to the fact that sanity rules at the end of the day, as it has in every developed country except for the US, up for about 20 years before this debate's happening, guys. In the vast majority of companies, no thank you, even in Singapore, we actually don't care very much about like the ill and the poor. We already have universal healthcare coverage, guys. We think government often just subsidizes these extra costs. So to the extent those harms exist, those harms are really quite small and quite marginal. And they say that, well, it's different for people who are terminally ill from other illnesses, right? That's opening say. Guys, we are all terminally ill, I just like to point out. So if we can create drugs which just give you more life, which is good, then that's like any other illness you go to cure yourself of, right? You're curing yourself of death. That's the best possible option in the world. And that's an option which we make possible and which you forever preclude. So let's talk about the economics of this, what kind of incentives it creates. So it's true that the drug companies are the ones in today's world who are doing research, not universities, because they don't have enough money most of the time. What does this do? this policy means that you effectively place a ceiling on the possible price of any new drug which enters the market. What is that ceiling? That ceiling is the lump sum which the insurance company is willing to pay. Because if you're only willing to pay $50,000 and the drug costs 60, you're going to encourage the patient to take the cheaper option, which means the drug company cannot put that drug on the market unless at the very point at which it comes out, it is already cheaper than what the insurance company is willing to pay in that lump sum payment, right? So you put drug companies in a really, really difficult position where many people are simply not going to buy the drugs and they are not going to get the money with which they need to do research. Which begs the question, do they really need this much money to do research? Answer, unsurprisingly, yes, they do need a vast amount of money to do this research. Here are a couple of reasons why. The testing you need to take involves huge sunk costs which only these companies can bear and which they need this money to bear. It is extremely hard to find people, for instance, to trial for effectiveness. Often the number of people affected by a certain illness is actually quite small. So if you want to prove your drug is statistically significant in terms of helping people with this illness, I'll take closing in a moment, you need quite a large sample. That means negotiating with loads of hospitals and government agencies for whether or not you can run this test. And then you need to wait a very long time to see if it's effective. You literally need to wait until all of these people die so you can determine if there was a marginal increase in the length of time they were able to be alive, right? So they need this money in order to make drugs more effective. And then think about safety as well. They know that if they put a drug on the market and there's even one media case of a catastrophic side effect they didn't cater for, that's the end of the company because the share price is going to plummet. So let's just be aware, it's very, very difficult for drug companies already to invest in making better drugs, which is why they need this money, which is why this policy is damaging because it forces people not to pay them this money. I'll take closing on this actually. Yeah, go for it.
You keep ignoring the fact that for the richest people, those who make most of the incentives for the drug companies, they're probably going to pay the $60,000 in order to extend their lives. They will be willing to forgo the lump sum. Therefore,
I completely agree, but poor people have rights too, and poor people have specific diseases which don't affect rich people. Here are some of them: asbestosis or mesothelioma, a disease which existed for 70 years from poor people inhaling asbestos in walls. We still don't have a cure for, because poor people need to have their interests catered for too, and they're the ones who most need research into things which specifically affect them. No thank you, right? So when currently poor people can pressure the market by forcing the insurance company to pay for them, that is a good thing because that forces research into what they want to do, right? So we'd like to point out there's a track record of success on this front, right? I mean, when my mom got third stage colon cancer, she actually made money from it, as weird as it sounds, because the cost of chemotherapy has decreased so much recently that actually after the government subsidy, she was like 10,000 Singapore dollars richer, right? That's a good example of how chemotherapy and antiretrovirals used to be very, very expensive. But because everyone paid for those costs and companies competed to make drugs more effective and cheaper, now actually these things are far more effective and far less expensive than they used to be in the past. Now, are we instrumentalizing people? Yes, we are. We're telling you, you need to torture yourself. You need to torture yourself, to be blunt, if you not torturing yourself means that you will torture other people in the future because they will never have the option of having a drug which lets them live the life they want to have, which might be wanting to live. States have to weigh up these sorts of things. They have no choice but to instrumentalize. When we tax people currently so that they spend less on oil, we're instrumentalizing present people so that future people don't get inundated by rising sea levels, right? That's instrumentalization. But states have no choice but to make these difficult trade-offs all of the time. We create the best possible world in which you have a choice, but it is a genuine choice and not a forced choice between either dribbling into dotage or killing yourself. That is a good world I am very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker very much for his remarks, and this House now recognizes the final speaker on the government bench, the government whip.
Okay? Two things in the speech, rather simple. First, tell you why the impacts on the insurance company and on future decisions are quite minimal, and therefore why the principle and the consent and choice are actually the core of this debate, and then I'm going to tell you why specifically our extension is what decides why this is something which is a legitimate choice, and actually the other side is not a legitimate something to coerce. Let's answer what is coming from the closing opposition, specifically in the first question, because the entire claim of both oppositions on the practicalities is basically we need it in order to create a better market for everyone, in order to create future drugs, in order to create more people who get insurance. Note, five answers to over here from closing opposition. Firstly, and this is a crucial line that's actually enough to take out the line in the debate. Most drugs are effective both for terminally ill people and for people who are suffering from the same disease who are not terminally ill. This is something to underline. Why? Because for the vast majority of people that have the disease, the same market structure is still going to exist. Therefore, most of the money which is going to be poured into the drug is still going to exist on both sides of the house. Therefore, the effect of the extension is minimal, and this is something which is true for the vast majority of the diseases, cancer, AIDS, etc. Secondly, a lot of people are still going to choose the right to live, which undermines the case of the open opposition as well. Quite intuitive. It is scary to die, right? So the rich are still going to be the people who are going to drive the market, and they have many alternatives that they can make their life comfortable as well as life extending, which means that for the vast majority, of the individuals, because the rich are still going to pour the money into the market, we agree that we're going to lose some of it, however, the vast majority of it is going to maintain. C, same countries in the world subsidize and regulate research and markets as well, which means that a lot of the money, if the incentive structure of the market is broken, is repaired by the state. The US may be an exemption of that, however, most research is done in Europe, in other countries as well. This is going to be maintained in a lot of the world. D, there is a competition that is going to be created in the vast majority of states. Why does it matter? Because even if the lump sum is something which is less on the amount of money that the insurance company should pay, and this is something which you completely consider because otherwise there is no market, we agree to that. However, if the competition still exists, companies are going to have an incentive to up the lump sum as well, which means that it's going to be the minimal amount which is going to be profitable for the company. This undermines both things of the case of the open opposition and the case of the closing opposition, because it's going to be something which is going to be quite close to the same amount of money as long as it's going to reduce the risk of the insurance company, which means that the amount of money is not going to change that massively. If they're going to claim, as Ashish actually tries to do, that there are some diseases which are only to the poor, I actually have a biology degree. I'm going to use some if procedure. He gives one example of that. This is not the case for most diseases, but even if this is correct, note, we have not found any treatment to these diseases because they are only for the poor. Companies do not have, under the current incentive structure, the incentive to invest money into those diseases anyway. What is the conclusion of all of this? We agree that some incentives are going to change. They are minimal. Therefore, what you should ask yourself as a core question of this debate, and what should be prioritized, is the idea of the consent of the individual. One more point about the extension that we got from closing opposition. Open opposition clearly states in their speeches, and as implied in their speeches, that it is not okay to instrumentalize individuals. Note, and this is important, the entire case is predicated upon the idea, but this is against the purpose of taking care of the individual, do no harm first. Closing opposition, therefore, contradict that claim when they say that it's fine to torture individuals in order to promote future societal goals. Let's continue to the principle. Note, and more answers to opening opposition here. Let's be clear and really clear in this debate. The issue is choice, what is undermining all of their claims. Note, if they're going to claim that this is the purpose of the institution to do no harm, we say that if I am clear as an individual, and I say that the best thing for me is to go to the Bahamas instead of actually being in a hospital for the last days of my life, this is doing no harm, because it actually prioritizes the patient, right? And you should underline it because it's important. They say, also, it's not okay to make money out of people. We say that this is weird, right? The mere fact that we're prioritizing some investments over other investments, like every choice that a government ever makes in reality, reality, right? Putting money into one drug other than the other drug, or the mere concept of having an insurance is putting a price on life. This is not a valid principle in this debate, and the fact that clinical trials are fine is also something that are going to earn money from. Moreover, they accept the concept of euthanasia, which means that they accept the fact that sometimes, even through the fact that families can apply pressure because some people are going to have wills, this is something which is acceptable if people are going to have a right to dignity. But before and first.
Excellent. So in the case of euthanasia, individuals prefer to die. As we told you in the first speech, in these cases, individuals would otherwise...
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it in a second.
Why would not care about the obligation to provide that kind of thing?
No, I'm going to do it in a second. Note, but beforehand, look, in cases in which people have clarity, they actually can choose for themselves if they wish to die. They have more knowledge on their status if they actually want and will have a better life going to a vacation instead of dying in the end of the day in a hospital. They know how much they suffer. This is a knowledge that no one else is going to know. Moreover, the vast majority is the state of people that we state in our extension and was not rebutted are actually people who are clear. The fact that you are terminally ill does not mean, in most cases, that you are someone who is hallucinating. These are not most diseases. Moreover, and this is another crucial sentence in our extension, this is a more informed choice than every other choice that we make. Doctors are irrelevant to this debate when Ashish tries to answer us. How come they're irrelevant? Because they're not affected by insurance companies and what they're going to do. But moreover, even if they are, people have more time to reflect upon this choice because this is likely to be the last choice that they're going to make, and this is what their life is going to evolve to. But even if you believe that in some cases you actually have no choice, as the PRI from opening proposition, we say that it's still valid in those cases specifically, which we add in our extension the hardest case of the open opposition. If I'm suffering, what can cause me to have no actual consent to something? Pain. The fact that my family is going to reject me at the end of the day. The fact that I'm going to have no support at the end of the day. If this is my life, and I have actually no support network, the mere fact is that I'm going to have a miserable life and a life of torture. If a choice is objectively bad, under the status quo, the state can take my consent in order to prioritize me as well. And in the case in which I actually have no consent that I cannot give it, it's an objective good for me to die at the end of the day. Case in point, the mere fact that we say that seatbelts are fine or the pensions are fine is because we assume that the state knows better in these situations. If I can actually give no consent to anyone, we can assume that in a life of torture, I prefer to be dead. This is why in the laws of war, killing is fine, but torture is not. We beg you to propose the motion.
I thank that speaker very much for his remarks, and this House now recognizes the final speaker of the debate, the opposition whip.
We are told that people shouldn't have to face the choice between torture and death. But if they do, it should be their choice. We say something very simple, that they needn't make that choice. 20 years ago, being unfortunate enough to go to school in a building that contained asbestos was a death sentence. Now, a number of different varieties of asbestosis, not mesothelioma, have cures. And that is the reality in today's debate. Because medical research happens when there are a large number of people, usually insurance companies, who are willing to pay substantial sums of money for that medication. And that is what they lose on their side of the house. But we get responses to this. So let's deal with them one by one. First, we were told, well, the amount of money you pay to look after one of these people won't reduce much because these lump sum payments will still be very high. First off, opening government concede that this is not the case, that there will be a substantial decrease. Secondly, and I'll explain this in my case, we have 1,000 different forms of aspirin, but no cure for malaria, a disease that inflicts hundreds of millions of people, because of the fact that there is a strong marginal incentive to produce better forms of aspirin and a minimal marginal incentive to produce cures for malaria because you don't get paid a whole lot of money. What I think this demonstrates is that sensitive. And when you decrease the price they can get for medication, you decrease the probability of cures being found. But finally, here's why the payments will be small. Because this bargaining is maximally asymmetric. If you want a good bargain in life, you have to be able to negotiate for a long time. That's why I've come to this tournament 3 years in a row, okay? Now, terminally ill people, by definition, can't negotiate for a long time because the clock is ticking and pretty soon there'll be nothing for them to negotiate with. So the very fact they are terminally ill means they're running out of time, so they cannot afford to string out the negotiating process. Then they say, well, you knifed your opening because they said do no harm. No, our opening said minimize the total level of harm. That was the explicit opening of both of their speeches. Then they said, well, can't we rely on the rich to provide cures for these diseases? Oh, everyone's favorite get out of jail free card, the 1%. Guys, there are 1% of them, okay? Yes, they can pay a lot of money per treatment, but there are very few of them, so they can't pay for very many treatments. But you know what else is true about the 1%? They're the people who are least likely to get sick. So yes, it may be the case that for every single treatment, they pay a little bit more, but the reality is fewer and fewer of them are likely to get sick, and there are fewer and fewer of them to begin with anyway. So realistically, if out of the range of different options you have as a drug company, you're pinning your hopes of success over the 1% of the 1% who get sick, I think that's a losing business strategy for you, and you can go out of business 10 years before you develop the drug. The next thing they said is, can't we rely on government subsidies? One, governments are terrible at subsidizing drugs. Here's why. Because governments hate spending that doesn't pay off for 20 years. You know why? Because you don't get to reap the benefits of that research 20 years down the line, because probabilities, the governments have changed. That's why, in fact, research funding for medication in the UK, year on year, has gone down. Because governments know they will never reap the benefits of it. Finally, they said these drugs are still effective before people are terminally ill. Lyme disease, osteoporosis, dementia, not true. And here's why. Because a disease isn't a static thing. It changes the chemical composition of your cells. And if a drug is effective, because it reacts to changes in your chemical composition of your cells, by definition, it can only be effective once the chemical composition of your cells has changed, i.e., once the disease has progressed. Now, of course, in some cases, the chemical composition of your cells changes well before you get terminal. But in huge numbers of diseases, like the ones I've listed, including many forms of cancer, that is not the case. So yes, they have some cute science, but that cute science does not apply in the majority of cases. Let's talk about choice. Because we say that on their side of the house, people have far fewer choices. And let's explain why. Because pharmaceutical companies have a myriad of different options they can do for research. They can either go for groundbreaking new research, which takes time, which is risky, which involves a huge amount of testing, or they can just reduce side effects and increase the quality and increase the branding of drugs that already exist. Because both of those can maximize your revenue, but one of those involves a much lower fixed cost. What does this mean? It means if you're going to get a drug to invest in new research, which by definition you need if you're going to cure a terminal disease, because otherwise it wouldn't be terminal, to make that trade-off. Let's be clear, they have thousands and thousands of different options, there are thousands and thousands of different afflictions, and thousands and thousands of different drugs where you can minimize the side effects and increase the branding. So, why are price of groundbreaking research? One, the huge amount of testing. Two, the incredibly risky approvals process. The FDA are incredibly risk-averse, because there's a huge amount of publicity for a drug that gets approved but is dangerous. There's no publicity for a drug that doesn't get approved, that is not dangerous, because no one gets to try that drug and get outraged about it. But then thirdly, and I'll take you in a second, George, there's a very high failure rate for these investments. You try thousands of different drugs before you get one that works. So if there's even a marginal decrease in your potential payoff for investing in a new drug, you're not going to do it, because it was such a risky endeavor to begin with. George.
Why do we owe obligations to future unborn humans when every dollar we spend on education and welfare today is a dollar less we spend on climate change, thereby accelerating the deaths?
Because not every person who might die of mesothelioma is unborn. Because not every person who might die of cancer is unborn. Because for every one patient who you give extra optionality to, there are thousands and millions alive today who will die if research does not progress. The premise is false. They're not unborn. But why do we care about global warming? Why do we care about government debt? Why? Because actually, the continued existence of humanity, the notion that our children might be able to have a life free of disease and suffering, is good. And the reason I know this is because it's the premise of your case, that people want to give money to their kids, and that is a moral good. What is the result? You have a ceiling on the cost of a new drug. You have no incentive to produce choice. They say we need choice because this is torture. We say torture is regrettable, but every individual who is tortured is an affront to humanity. And every individual who is tortured is an equal affront to humanity. So if we can show you that the number is reduced, we're fine with that. We don't see why we owe a special moral obligation to the person who is knocking at our door today, as opposed to the person who will be knocking at our door in 2 weeks because of the elementary school they went to and the way that was constructed. We think that every individual has equal dignity, and that's why we're happy to maximize that dignity through empowering research. Ladies and gentlemen, for what I hope is the final time, I'm exceptionally proud to oppose.
So what will happen now is the adjudication panel will retire and discuss this and come to a decision, a consensus decision hopefully, about who has won the debate. We will be announcing that at our awards banquet this evening, but more importantly for the audience, you can find out that by going to the website listed on the program that you should have received, and you will find out which team prevailed, either one of the two teams from Cambridge, the team from Yale, or the team from Tel Aviv. I thank you again. I hope you will give me one more round of applause for all the teams and all the competitors. If you are somebody who is a member of the debate competition here, who is participating, then we will be arranging van rides and transportation over to the banquet.